My husband paid $3,000 monthly in child support, but his ex-wife Lorena said it wasn't enough and humiliated the children because of it. "Tell your dad we're poor because of him," she would scream at them in front of me every Sunday when we picked them up. "Look how he lives with his new wife while you don't even have decent shoes." The humiliation was constant, but what I discovered about what she really spent that money on left the entire family in absolute shock. My name is Andrea, and I'm 32 years old. I'm a nurse at General Hospital, and I've been married to Roberto, the most hardworking and loving man I know, for 2 years. He has 2 children from his previous marriage, Sophia, 12, and Diego, 10, whom I love as if they were my own. But his ex-wife, Lorena, 35, has turned every child exchange into a nightmare of humiliation and emotional blackmail. That Sunday afternoon, in front of the shopping center where we always did the exchange, Lorena had orchestrated her cruelest spectacle to date. She had dressed the children in old torn clothes, told them they hadn't had breakfast because there was no money for food, and had trained them to ask me for money directly. "Andrea, can you give me 200 pesos to buy milk?" Sophia whispered to me with tears in her eyes. "Mom says Dad doesn't give us enough money and that's why we're always hungry." Roberto was devastated. He worked 12 hours daily as a construction supervisor, religiously paid the $3,000 pesos each month, and additionally bought clothes, school supplies, and medicines for the children. But Lorena had managed to convince her own children that their father was a cheapskate who had abandoned them. But what Lorena didn't know was that I had begun documenting each of her lies and manipulations. She didn't know I had access to financial information she believed was hidden. And she definitely didn't know that her little emotional blackmail that afternoon would trigger an investigation that would reveal secrets, hidden for years. The most shocking thing of all is that the $3,000 monthly had never reached the children. Lorena had been using that money for something completely different. Something that, when discovered, would change the children's custody forever. Follow my story to the end and comment from which country you're watching me. I want to know how far this story has reached, about how a manipulative ex-wife learned she had completely underestimated the wrong woman. Now, I'm going to show you how it all began and why Lorena was so desperate to get more money that she was willing to use her own children as emotional weapons. It all began 3 years ago when I met Roberto at the hospital where I work. He had come to the emergency room with a hand injury after an accident at the construction site, and I was the nurse who treated him. He was a 38-year-old man, hardworking, responsible, and you could tell he was going through a difficult time in his life. During the following visits to change bandages, Roberto told me his story. He had divorced Lorena 6 months earlier, after discovering she had been spending family money on things he didn't understand. "She always said there wasn't enough money for household expenses," he explained sadly. "But I earned well, and I never understood where it all went." The divorce had been bitter. Lorena had fought fiercely for high child support, alleging that Roberto was an irresponsible father who had abandoned his children for another woman, although I didn't exist in his life at that time. The judge had ordered $3,000 pesos monthly, a considerable amount, considering Roberto earned $15,000 pesos per month. The first months of our relationship were beautiful but complicated. Every time Roberto picked up the children, he would return devastated by Lorena's poisonous comments. "She tells them I'm a bad father," he would tell me with tears in his eyes. "That I abandoned them for you, that I don't care about them. That's why I don't give them enough money." The first time I met Sophia and Diego, my heart broke. They were sweet children, but clearly confused and hurt. Sophia, the older one, acted like a premature adult, taking care of her younger brother and repeating the exact words her mother had taught her. "Is it true that my dad doesn't love us?" Diego asked me with his little eyes full of tears during our first outing to the park. "Mom says if he loved us, he would give us more money so we wouldn't be poor." Roberto worked tirelessly to give them everything they needed. In addition to the $3,000 pesos monthly support, he separately paid for private school, $2,500 monthly for both children, health insurance, $800 monthly, and constantly bought clothes, shoes, school supplies, and toys. In reality, he was spending more than $7,000 pesos monthly on his children. But Lorena had perfected the art of making the children feel abandoned and poor. Every Sunday when we picked them up, there was a new story of economic need. We couldn't buy meat this week. We ran out of gas and don't have money to pay. The children need shoes, but there's no money. Lorena has always been very dramatic, Roberto's sister Carmen explained to me during a family dinner. Since they were dating, there was always some financial crisis. She always needed more money for something urgent. But we never understood what she spent it on. What I didn't know then was that Lorena had been living a double life for years, completely financed by child support and the constant emergencies she asked Roberto for. The children were just pawns in a much larger and more sinister game. But what happened the next day changed everything forever. The day after meeting the children, Roberto invited me to accompany him to the school for the parent-teacher meeting. It was an important moment because he wanted the teachers to know me as part of his children's lives. What I discovered that afternoon left me frozen. Lorena had been telling teachers and other parents that Roberto was an irresponsible father who didn't pay full child support, and that's why the children came to school without breakfast and with incomplete school supplies. Mr. Roberto, Sophia's teacher told us with a mixture of concern and reproach, we need to talk about the children's economic situation. Mrs. Lorena has informed us that you're not fulfilling your financial obligations. The humiliation was total. In front of 30 parents, the school principal called us aside to discuss the minors' welfare. Lorena had created a complete narrative where Roberto was the villain who had abandoned his children for a younger woman, me, leaving them in poverty. It's very sad to see how some fathers prioritize their new relationships over their children's welfare, commented a mother loudly, looking directly at me. Those poor children always arrive without lunch, with dirty clothes, asking to borrow school materials. But the most devastating was when the school social worker showed us a report that Lorena had presented. According to the document, Roberto only paid 1,500 pesos monthly, half the real amount. Arrived drunk to pick up the children, total lie. And I was a negative influence who had distanced him from his paternal responsibilities. Mrs. Andrea, the social worker, told me coldly, "We understand that new relationships can be complicated, but we hope you understand that the minor's welfare must be the priority." Roberto was in shock. He took out the support payment receipts, the private school receipts, the health insurance invoices, but the damage was already done. Lorena had planted seeds of doubt in the entire school community. "Look, Roberto," the principal told him condescendingly, "we know divorces are difficult, but these children need stability. If you can't fulfill your economic obligations, maybe you should reconsider the time you spend with them." The humiliation continued when other parents began whispering and pointing at us. There go the ones who can't support their children. What a shame to bring the new girlfriend to school. Those poor children deserve better. When we left the school, Roberto was devastated. "I don't understand how she can lie like that," he told me with tears in his eyes. "I pay everything the judge asks for, and more. Why does she do this?" But I had seen something in Lorena's eyes during the meeting that deeply disturbed me. It wasn't just manipulation or revenge. There was real desperation, as if she needed that extra money for something urgent and specific. At that moment, I didn't know this was barely the beginning. The following months were a constant escalation of emotional manipulation and financial blackmail. Lorena had perfected the art of using children as weapons, always with witnesses, always with an apparently valid justification, and always when Roberto was most emotionally vulnerable. On Diego's birthday, she accidentally forgot to invite Roberto to the party. "I thought you wouldn't want to come because you didn't contribute to the expenses," she told him over the phone. "The party cost 5,000 pesos, and I had to pay for it alone with the support you give me." At Sophia's 6th grade graduation, all parents brought flowers except us because Lorena had forgotten to tell us the correct date. It was my coworker, Lupita, who worked weekends at a private aesthetic clinic, who revealed something devastating to me. Lorena had been spending thousands of pesos monthly on beauty treatments, minor cosmetic surgeries, and luxury products, all paid in cash. "Andrea, that woman comes every week," Lupita confessed to me during our night shift. Botox, fillers, facial treatments, laser hair removal. She spends about 4,000 pesos each visit, always pays cash, and always says it's money from her irresponsible ex-husband. But there was more. Lorena had begun a defamation campaign on social media, creating dramatic posts about being an abandoned single mother struggling to support her children with insufficient support. The posts went viral in single mothers groups, generating sympathy and even economic donations. "Look how my ex lives with his new wife, while my children and I survive on $3,000 pesos a month," she would write alongside photos of our house, which was modest but decent, contrasted with photos of the children in old clothes she herself put on them for the photos. The escalation intensified when she began directly sabotaging our time with the children. Every time we had special plans, Lorena had a medical emergency or economic crisis that required the children to stay with her. Sophia got sick and needs me to take care of her. I don't have money for a taxi. I can't take Diego. The electricity was cut because I couldn't pay. I need them to help me at home. Roberto, being the loving father he was, always sent extra money for emergencies. In reality, in addition to the official $3,000 pesos monthly, he was sending another $2,000 to $3,000 pesos additional each month for unforeseen expenses. Then came the more elaborate lies wrapped in emotional blackmail. She would tell the children that Roberto had promised to take them on vacation, but had spent the money on Andrea that he had promised, to buy them a computer but had preferred to buy things, for his new house that he had promised, to pay for swimming lessons but had decided they weren't important. "Why doesn't Dad keep his promises?" Sophia asked me with tears in her eyes during one of our outings. "Mom says before he met you, he always gave us everything we needed." The breaking point came when I discovered that Lorena had been intercepting the gifts Roberto sent to the children. She had convinced neighbors to receive packages when she wasn't there, and then told the children that their father had forgotten their birthdays or special dates. But the worst was yet to come. The most painful betrayal came during Christmas vacation. We had planned a special beach trip with the children, something we had been saving for months. It was our opportunity to create beautiful family memories and show Sophia and Diego that we were a united family. What I discovered 2 days before the trip changed my perception of the entire situation. Lorena had not only sabotaged our Christmas plans, but had been using the children to extort additional money from Roberto under threats of false medical emergencies. When I arrived early at the hospital for my dawn shift, I found Lorena in the emergency room with Diego, claiming he had severe symptoms that required immediate attention. But as an experienced nurse, I immediately recognized that the child was perfectly healthy. "Doctor, my son has been vomiting all night," Lorena lied dramatically. "His father doesn't want to pay for private medical care, so we have to come to the public hospital." What devastated me was seeing how she had trained Diego to act sick. The poor child was faking nausea and weakness, clearly confused, but obeying his mother's instructions. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears of shame. "Andrea, don't tell Dad I'm here," he whispered to me when Lorena went to the bathroom. "Mom says if Dad finds out, he's going to get angry because we spent money on the doctor." But there was something more sinister. Lorena had been taking the children to different hospitals and clinics, creating a false medical history of constant illnesses, supposedly caused by malnutrition and emotional stress due to paternal negligence. Investigating discreetly in the hospital system, I discovered that in the last 6 months, Lorena had taken the children to emergency rooms 12 times with symptoms that were never medically confirmed. Each visit generated bills that she sent to Roberto as urgent medical expenses that he paid immediately without questioning the final blow came when I found text messages on Diego's phone, which he had forgotten at our house. They were conversations between Lorena and a man named Javier, where they discussed how to use the children to get more money from Roberto. "The children are working perfectly. To get extra money from him," Lorena wrote. "Every time we need cash for our plans, I invent a medical emergency and Roberto pays without asking." "You're brilliant, love," Javier responded. "With what you get from support and the false emergencies, we almost have enough for the business. We just need a little more." My heart stopped. Lorena had a secret relationship, and was using child support money to finance a business with her boyfriend, while making her own children live like beggars to maintain the poverty charade. But the most chilling was the last message. Tomorrow I'm going to tell Roberto that the children need urgent surgery. With that, we can get the last $20,000 pesos we need. That night, for the first time, I saw the true face of manipulation. Lorena was not only stealing money destined for her children, but was willing to traumatize them psychologically to finance her new life with another man. It was then that I decided it was time to act. The revelation came when I decided to discreetly follow Lorena during one of her supposed work days. She had told Roberto she worked part-time at an accounting office, but had never been able to explain why her schedule was so irregular or why she never had pay stubs. I hired a private investigator, Licenciado Morales, who discovered that Lorena had no formal job. Instead, she had been operating an elaborate fraud scheme that involved not only Roberto, but other divorced men in the city. Mrs. Andrea, the investigator explained to me during our secret meeting, your husband is not the only victim. Lorena has been executing the same pattern with at least 4 different men during the last 3 years. He showed me photographic evidence of Lorena with different men, all apparently divorced with children, all being manipulated with the same tactics of emotional blackmail and constant financial emergencies. But the most shocking was discovering that Lorena and her boyfriend Javier had been meticulously documenting their scams. They had a complete file with psychological profiles of their victims, specific strategies for each man, and even a timeline of how much money they expected to extract from each one. Roberto Hernandez. Profile. Guilty father. Hardworking. Easy to manipulate emotionally. Strategy. Use children as emotional weapons. Financial goal, $8,000 pesos monthly. Status. Active and productive. The file contained recorded conversations where Lorena and Javier laughed at their victims, planning how to intensify manipulations and extract more money. There were photos of the children being trained to act poor and sick, scripts of the lies they should tell, and even rewards they received for acting well during the scams. But the most chilling piece was a document titled Exit Plan, Operation Support. It was a detailed plan of how Lorena and Javier planned to disappear with all the stolen money, taking the children to another state where Roberto could never find them. The plan included Phase 1. Extract the last $50,000 pesos with false medical emergencies. Phase 2. Accuse Roberto of child abuse to obtain full custody. Phase 3. Move to Cancun with false identities. Phase 4. Begin the same scheme with new victims in the tourist zone. I was in Phase 1, and according to the document, Phase 2 was scheduled to be executed after Christmas vacation. The specific plan was to lightly drug the children so they would appear traumatized, take them to the hospital, and accuse Roberto of physical and psychological abuse. My heart was beating violently. Lorena had planned not only to steal Roberto's money, but to destroy his relationship with his children forever and disappear with them. But there was something else in the file that left me breathless. Photographs of other children who had been victims of the same scheme. Children who had been separated from their biological fathers through false accusations, and who now lived with Lorena and Javier as part of their facade family for future scams. What I discovered next left me in shock. Following the clues from Lorena's file, I decided to investigate her history more deeply. What I discovered left me speechless, and finally explained her desperation to get money and her ability to manipulate children. Lorena wasn't a desperate single mother as everyone believed. For the last 5 years, she'd been operating a network of matrimonial and child support scams that extended across 3 different states. She had not only scammed Roberto, but had systematically destroyed the lives of dozens of families. The investigator discovered that Lorena Martinez wasn't even her real name. Her true name was Claudia Vasquez, and she had criminal records for fraud, extortion, and kidnapping of minors in other states. She had been fleeing from justice for years, changing identities and moving from city to city. But the most shocking was discovering that Sofia and Diego weren't her only children. She had 4 other children from previous relationships, all separated from their biological fathers through the same pattern of manipulation and false accusations. The children were trained from a young age to be accomplices in the scams, acting as victims to generate sympathy and money. I found devastating testimonies from her previous victims. A man in Guadalajara who had lost custody of his daughter after Lorena falsely accused him of abuse. A businessman in Monterrey who had lost his business paying false medical emergencies for 2 years. A teacher in Puebla who had attempted suicide after being publicly accused of paternal negligence. That woman completely destroyed my life, Mr. Ramirez told me over the phone from Guadalajara. She took my daughter from me, ruined me financially, and when I tried to report her, she had already disappeared with a new identity. My daughter is now 15 years old, and I don't know if she's alive or dead. The pattern was always the same. Lorena would approach vulnerable divorced men, get pregnant quickly, or arrive with children from previous relationships, create a dependent relationship, and then begin the cycle of manipulation and extortion that lasted years. Investigating further, I discovered that Javier wasn't who he claimed to be either. His real name was Carlos Mendoza, and he was a professional scammer specialized in identity fraud and money laundering. Together, they had perfected a system where Lorena handled emotional manipulation, and he managed the financial and legal aspects of the scams. Lorena's personal diary, which the investigator had managed to photograph, revealed her completely sociopathic mentality. These stupid men are so easy to manipulate. You just need to find their emotional weak point and exploit it mercilessly. Children are the perfect tools because fathers will do anything to not seem like bad parents. But the most chilling was the most recent entry. Roberto is almost ready for the final phase. Andrea is a problem because she's too intelligent, but we can use her to our advantage. When we accuse Roberto of abuse, we'll say Andrea was an accomplice, 2 victims for the price of 1. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Armed with this explosive information, I began my own deeper investigation. I contacted Lorena's previous victims in other states, and together we began building a federal case against her and her scam network. Mrs. Andrea, Licenciado Garcia, a lawyer specialized in family fraud, told me, "What you've discovered is a large-scale criminal operation. We need to act quickly before they execute their escape plan." But my most unexpected ally turned out to be Roberto's sister, Carmen, who had been keeping her own suspicions about Lorena for years. She had been discreetly documenting inconsistencies in Lorena's stories and had noticed strange patterns in her behavior. "Andrea, I always knew something wasn't right," Carmen confessed to me during a secret meeting. Lorena knew too much about psychological manipulation to be just a desperate mother. Her lies were too elaborate, too calculated. Carmen had been investigating on her own and had discovered that Lorena had been using multiple identities on social media to contact other divorced men. She had fake profiles on dating apps, always presenting herself as a struggling single mother, looking for a responsible man for her children. Together we began contacting other victims. One by one, they began sharing their experiences. The pattern was identical in all cases. The same emotional manipulation, the same false medical emergencies, the same accusations of paternal negligence when the men began to suspect. Mrs. Andrea, the ex-wife of one of the victims, told me, "That woman not only destroyed my ex-husband's marriage, but traumatized our children by making them believe their father didn't love them. It took us years to repair the psychological damage." The most shocking was the revelation from a social worker in Guadalajara, who had been investigating Lorena for months before she disappeared from that city. We had evidence that she was operating a minor trafficking network, Licenciada Ruiz explained to me via video call. She used children not only for financial scams, but loaned them to other criminals for similar schemes in different cities. Meanwhile, Roberto had begun noticing worrying changes in the children's behavior. Sofia had begun asking strange questions about family secrets, and Diego had started having nightmares about bad men coming for him at night. "Dad," Sofia told me during one of our outings, "Mom says we're going to move very far away soon and maybe we won't see you again." Is that true? It was clear that Lorena had begun psychologically preparing the children for disappearance. She was telling them that their father had sold them to other people, that Andrea was dangerous for them, and that they had to protect themselves by staying close to her. But what I observed next confirmed my worst fears. Lorena, sensing that her scheme was beginning to crumble, launched her most desperate and cruel attack. A week before Christmas, she had begun executing the final phase of her plan to disappear with the children, and completely destroy Roberto. First, she intensified the false medical emergencies. In a single week, she took the children to the hospital 3 times with different symptoms. Diego supposedly had severe abdominal pain, Sofia had lost consciousness at school, and both showed signs of severe malnutrition. Each hospital visit generated bills of $5,000 to $8,000, pesos that she immediately sent to Roberto as urgent medical expenses that can't wait. Roberto, desperate for his children's welfare, paid immediately without questioning. But her masterstroke was more sinister and calculated. She had begun lightly drugging the children with mild sedatives so they would appear genuinely sick and traumatized during medical visits. "Roberto, we need to talk urgently," she told me that afternoon, arriving at our house with extreme panic on her face. The hospital called. They say the children have strange levels of medication in their blood and they need to investigate if there's negligence at home. What she didn't know was that Roberto had been secretly working with authorities for weeks. Licenciado Morales had given all the information about Lorena's scams to federal police, and they had been building a case while keeping her under surveillance. Love. Roberto confessed to me that night in private. "I've known about Lorena's true identity for weeks. The police asked me to act normal while they gathered enough evidence to arrest her and rescue all the children she has under her control." Roberto showed me his own file of evidence. Recordings of Lorena's phone conversations with Javier, surveillance photographs showing her meetings with other victims, even security videos documenting how she drugged the children before taking them to the hospital. "They wanted to have enough evidence to dismantle the entire network," he explained with tears in his eyes. "But when I saw she had begun drugging our children, I knew I had to act immediately. Together, we had been building a case not only to expose Lorena to authorities, but to rescue all the children she had kidnapped from their biological families over the years. We had testimonies from 12 victims, forensic evidence of the drugs, and complete documentation of the criminal network. But Lorena had one last ace up her sleeve. She had contacted not only social services but local media, preparing a massive media campaign where she would publicly accuse Roberto of child abuse and me of being an accomplice. "She's going to make it seem like you abused the children in front of the entire city." Roberto warned me. "She has everything planned. Press conference, interviews with the drug children so they appear traumatized, and even falsified medical evidence that she created herself." It was then that I decided it was time to show who I really was. The day of Lorena's supposed press conference, I arrived prepared for the final war. In my purse, I carried copies of all the evidence. Photographs of Lorena with multiple identities, recordings of her criminal plans, testimonies from her previous victims, and complete documentation of her scam network. When Lorena began her media spectacle exactly as Roberto had predicted, presenting the drugged children as victims of paternal abuse, while crying dramatically in front of cameras, I calmly stood up from my seat in the audience. "Before this spectacle continues," I said with a clear and firm voice, "I'd like to show something to the media and authorities present." I took out my phone and played an audio recording. It was Lorena's voice talking to Javier. "The children are perfect for the final phase. With the drugs I gave them this morning, they're going to seem genuinely traumatized on camera. Roberto won't be able to defend himself from this." The silence in the conference room was absolute. The 20 journalists present, social services representatives, and authorities were frozen. "That's the voice of Claudia Vasquez, also known as Lorena Martinez," I continued, confessing that she drugged her own children to make them appear as abuse victims at this press conference. Then I took out photographs of Lorena with multiple identities and previous victims. These are photographs of the same woman operating identical scams in Guadalajara, Monterrey, and Puebla during the last 5 years. Roberto stood up and stood beside me. "Media," he said with a trembling but firm voice. "There's much more you need to know about this criminal network." He took out documents showing Lorena's true plan: kidnap the children, disappear with the stolen money, and begin new scams in Cancun. "My ex-wife has been operating a family fraud network that has destroyed dozens of families throughout the country. Those are lies," stammered Lorena, pale as a ghost. "Roberto is manipulating Andrea to get revenge on me. He fabricated that evidence to take my children away." But then our surprise guests arrived. Licenciado Garcia entered the room accompanied by federal agents, Lorena's previous victims from other states, and the biological parents of the other children she had kidnapped. "Claudia Vasquez," announced the federal agent with a firm voice. "You're under arrest for federal fraud, extortion, kidnapping of minors, and human trafficking." Mr. Ramirez from Guadalajara approached with tears in his eyes. "That woman took my daughter from me 3 years ago with the same lies. Thanks to you, I'm finally going to be able to get her back." One by one, Lorena's victims began sharing their testimonies in front of the cameras. The men she had scammed, the children she had kidnapped, the families she had destroyed with her manipulations. The climactic moment came when forensic doctors presented the results of Sofia and Diego's blood tests. "The minors have significant levels of sedatives in their system," announced the doctor. They were deliberately drugged to appear traumatized. While the entire room watched in shock, Lorena screamed, "This is Andrea's fault. She destroyed my family. Roberto, don't let them do this to me." But Roberto looked at her with a mixture of pain and determination. "Claudia, you destroyed your own life with your lies. Andrea saved it by having the courage to expose the truth." What happened next surprised everyone. The consequences were immediate and devastating for Lorena and her criminal network. The federal arrest meant she faced charges in multiple states, with a potential sentence of 25 years in prison. But the social consequences were even deeper, one by one. The children she had kidnapped over the years were reunited with their biological families. Mr. Ramirez finally got to hug his daughter after 3 years of forced separation. A mother in Monterrey recovered her twins whom she believed had died in a car accident that Lorena had invented. "Andrea," Mr. Ramirez told me with tears in his eyes, "you not only saved your stepchildren, but gave hope back to dozens of families who had lost their children because of that woman." The media, which had initially come to cover the child abuse story, became the main defenders of our cause. The story went viral nationally, exposing how criminal networks exploit the child protection system for their own purposes. But the most shocking revelation came from the federal investigation, which discovered that Lorena had been operating with the complicity of corrupt officials in social services and the judicial system. Several judges and social workers were arrested for accepting bribes to facilitate the scams. "Mrs. Andrea," the federal prosecutor explained to me, "your courage to expose this network has dismantled a criminal operation that extended across 6 states and had victimized more than 200 families." The medical community was also impacted. Hospitals implemented new protocols to detect cases of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, where parents deliberately make their children sick to obtain attention or economic benefits. "Your case has become a reference study," the general hospital director told me. "We're training all our staff to recognize signs of child medical manipulation." But the most beautiful thing was seeing how Sofia and Diego began to heal psychologically. Without Lorena's toxic influence, the children began showing their true personality. They were intelligent, loving, and had an incredible capacity for forgiveness. "Andrea," Sofia told me during a family therapy session, "thank you for saving Dad and saving us. We knew Mom was doing bad things to us, but we were afraid to say something." Diego, who had been the most traumatized by the drugs and manipulations, began to flourish in an environment of genuine love. "Now I know Dad always loved us," he told me with a smile. "And you love us for real too, not like Mom who only pretended." The school where the children studied became an example of how educational institutions can detect and report cases of child abuse. They implemented special programs to help children who had been victims of psychological manipulation. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. 2 years after Lorena's arrest, when we thought we had seen everything, came the most shocking revelation of all. During the federal trial, investigators discovered that Lorena had been blackmailed herself by an international criminal organization that specialized in child trafficking and family fraud. All her destructive behavior had been orchestrated by criminals who had been controlling her for years. "Mrs. Andrea," the federal prosecutor explained to me, "Claudia Vasquez was a victim before becoming a victimizer. When she was 18 years old, she was kidnapped and forced into prostitution. The criminals used photographs and videos from that time to blackmail her and force her to recruit families for their schemes. The revelation left us all in shock. The manipulative behaviors, the elaborate scams, the obsession with getting money, everything, had been part of a larger criminal plan to infiltrate and exploit the family protection system from within. The criminals forced her to perfect psychological manipulation techniques, continued the prosecutor. Their objective was to create a network of mothers who could legally kidnap children through the judicial system, to then sell them to international trafficking networks. The leader of the criminal organization had been arrested in an international operation, and during his interrogation revealed how they had been using women like Lorena to infiltrate family systems in 15 different countries. Claudia tried to escape the blackmail several times, the forensic psychologist who had evaluated her case explained to us. But every time she tried to confess the truth, the criminals threatened to kill the children she already had under her care. Her destructive behavior was her desperate way of protecting the children while following criminal orders. When Roberto and I went to visit her at the federal prison where she had been receiving intensive therapy and collaborating with authorities, we found a completely different woman. Her eyes, which had previously been full of calculation and desperation, now showed genuine relief and horror at her past actions. "Andrea," she told me with tears running down her cheeks, "I can't believe the terrible things I did to you, Roberto, and especially to my children. For years I lived in a nightmare, where I had to hurt the people I loved to protect them from something worse." Her therapist explained that Lorena had developed complex post-traumatic stress disorder due to years of blackmail and death threats. She genuinely believed that if she didn't execute the scams perfectly, the criminals would kill not only her children, but all the children she had rescued from other families. The recovery was slow, but real. Lorena began making concrete reparations. She testified against the International Criminal Organization, helped identify other victims of family trafficking, and worked with authorities to create prevention programs against criminal infiltration in child protection systems. "I don't expect your forgiveness," she told me during one of our supervised therapy sessions. "But I want you to know that every day I work to be the mother my children deserved before these criminals destroyed my life." The moment of true reconciliation came 3 years later, when Lorena was released on parole after serving her reduced sentence for cooperation with authorities. Sophia and Diego, now 15 and 13 years old, had decided they wanted to know the true story of their mother. "Mom," Sophia told her during their first supervised visit, "we understand you were a victim too. But we need time to heal from everything that happened." Today, 5 years later, Lorena is a completely different person. She works as a counselor for human trafficking victims and has dedicated her life to helping other women who have been forced to commit crimes under threat. Her relationship with the children remains careful and supervised, but it's genuine. "Andrea," she told me during a recent family meeting, "you saved my life in 2 ways. First, by exposing the truth. You freed me from the criminal blackmail that had controlled me for years. Second, you showed me what it truly means to love children unconditionally." The criminal organization was completely dismantled, rescuing more than 500 children who had been separated from their families through similar schemes worldwide. Roberto and I became advocates for family rights, working with international organizations to prevent child trafficking. The $3,000 pesos monthly that Roberto had been religiously paying had never actually reached his children. They had been financing an international criminal network. But in the end, his unconditional love and my determination to protect our family were stronger than any manipulation. And so I learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most deeply are fighting forces we can't even imagine. The child support that Lorena claimed was insufficient wasn't for her children. It was the price she paid to keep them alive under the control of ruthless criminals. Because in the end, truth always finds a way to come to light. And true love can survive even the most painful betrayals when it's built on solid foundations of protection, honesty, and understanding.